what a first week. I have had so much fun chatting with you guys online, rereading Joshua in our first 4 chapters. I mean, a lot has happened, right? Joshua gets commissioned to lead God's people for the first time. He empowers Joshua. The people begin to obey him and trust him. They cross over the sea just like they did the generations before when God performed a miracle and they walked across on dry ground. We met Rahab in the story where God saved her and her family as the Israelites came in and conquered her city. I mean, so much was going on. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed it just like I did. In fact, I know you did. The chatter on Facebook has been spectacular. Now, week 2 is not going to disappoint either. There's a lot going on in the next week to come when we start reading the next chapters in Joshua. So before we begin, I want to just reiterate a central truth of Joshua that we find in the first chapter. Now, this central truth is going to set up the entire book of Joshua, and we need to understand it because it's the underlying point of what the author is trying to say as he begins to tell us these individual stories that are taking place in Joshua. So in the first chapter, we see God's instructing Joshua on how to be successful in all that God has called him to do. And in verses 7 and 8 are the key verses of what God is asking Joshua to do and how he's going to be successful. So let's pull out our Bible and read these verses. So Joshua verse 7 says, "Above all, be strong and very courageous, to carefully observe the whole instruction my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, so that you will have success wherever you go. The book of the instruction must not depart from your mouth. You are to recite it day and night, so that you may carefully observe everything written in it. For then you will prosper and succeed in whatever you do." So Joshua knows that the road ahead will be treacherous. Does he have all the details of all the battles, of all the things that are going to take place? No, but he certainly knows that it's going to be treacherous. And you certainly know that there is some fear lingering in his heart for God to tell him, do not fear, Joshua. In fact, he has to tell him several times to not be fearful, to be courageous, be strong, be brave. And above all, do these 2 things. The first thing, obviously, is to be very courageous. Now, it's important to notice that God does not say, I want you to feel courageous. I want you to just act courageous. No, it's a command. God is commanding Joshua to be courageous. Now, something that we need to realize about being courageous is that being courageous is not the absence of fear in our life. Being brave, choosing to be courageous, is choosing to do the next thing in spite of our fear. So as Joshua moves forward in his conquest, he must choose to do the next thing that God asked him to do, despite how he feels at the moment. And that's super important because so many times God calls us to do something and we don't feel like doing it, whether it be fear, laziness, just a lack of clarity, whatever our feeling might be, we have to push forward and move in the direction that God is calling us to in spite of all of that. And that's what God is calling Joshua to do. Now, the second thing that God says above all else for Joshua to do is to carefully observe the whole instruction of Moses. Now, the whole instruction of Moses is the Torah. And the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This is the instructions that God gave Moses to give to his people. And in those books, it contains laws, decrees, commands, instructions for intentional living, everything that the Israelite people needed to live out their daily life with the Lord. And God is saying, Joshua, you need to be brave And you need to be brave because I am asking you to obey everything in the first books, in the first commands that I have given Moses. And you need to do them to the T. You need to know them. You need to meditate on them day and night. You need to repeat them morning and evening. You need to teach them to those around you. And you need to carefully observe the things that I have called you to do. Now this phrase that says, do not turn from it to the right or to the left, it means don't deviate from it. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. Don't put your own spin on it. Don't leave out the important stuff because it's too hard to do. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, but carefully observe everything that I have asked you to do. And verse 8 shows us how to do that. It shows us that we are to meditate on it day and night. And so what God is asking Joshua to do is he's asking Joshua to read God's word, to learn it, to know it, and then to live it out. And if he will do that, he will have success in what God is asking him to do. Now the opposite is true. If Joshua does not live this out, if he does not carefully observe it or read it or obey it, then the curses of God will fall upon Joshua and his people. That's the weight of what God is asking him to do, that the consequences of disobedience will follow, just like the consequences of obedience and the blessings of obedience will follow Joshua. And that's a heavy weight for any leader, for any person to follow. But God has called Joshua to this task. Now, this principle, the principle of God's people obeying him to succeed or disobeying him to fail, is an important principle that we need to mark in our study for going forward into this next week. Because what the author does is he sets up stories that show us these two bookends: somebody who is unlikely to follow God, who is blessed by God, and somebody who is supposed to follow God, who is cursed by God because they did not follow this principle. So as we move forward in our reading this week, take note of who it is that is obeying God and who it is that is disobeying God. So I hope you have a great time reading this week. There's a lot more to come. There's a lot of action in our second week, and I can't wait to dig in and to see what you guys have to say about it on Facebook. So see you on the other side.